tossing grenades at windmills podcast.
Welcome to another entry in the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast series called 11 Fixes for Broken Everything. I'm Tom Ricks, and I will be your host. This is the penultimate of that series, which I have enjoyed doing because it has let me share some of my more practical, scalable ideas that don't involve a complete system reboot. And at some point, I will share some of my more radical ideas about how to fix the Constitution or what our society should look like, because in my opinion, a reboot is inevitable. Incremental change is all well and good, and is actually well and good, and is the norm, but we live in curious and troubled times. But as I said, this is not a series about that. So I'll flat out say that the last part of this series, except I'm considering doing a conclusion episode, trying to maybe stream some of these ideas together in a 12th entry / conclusion. I haven't decided if I'm going to do that or not. And the last one will be about culture and how to shape it at a macro level, in my opinion. I've talked about, for example, coordination, and I've talked about tools that would allow anyone or an individual or a group to shape culture, but not the organized way I have in mind. But at its root, there's something I like to have, for me personally, that I call the hierarchy of values. And back when I used to be Mormon, I had my worldview and my philosophy shaped in large part by that religion, which was crafted at a time of rationalist thinking. The world at the beginning of the 19th century was a very safe place in some ways for a thinker. We knew just enough to think we knew almost everything. We had discovered gravity. In the eyes of a white European settler, the world was becoming more explored, more civilized. The worldview, no matter what your religious take was that the cosmos was created by a giant watchmaker who regulated everything from the movement of the heavens to the bumblebee that was flying through the flowers outside of your window. And the hierarchy of values for me is a very useful tool. And even though I have now since left the Mormon Church and have become much more educated about the way reality actually works, which is much more messy and much more complex, I still retain a few bits and pieces that I developed for myself. And to be clear, this is not something that, at least that I'm aware of, exists in LDS teaching, and I'm pretty well versed in their theology. The hierarchy of values is, for me, a way to resolve conflict, morally speaking, when I'm in a situation and I'm trying to determine how I'm going to behave in a moral fashion. And I will flat out say that as a human being, I don't always make the right choice. I don't always do the moral thing, but I try to. And it's not always possible to reconcile two conflicting values. Let me give you an example. Justice and mercy are both good things. And as an individual and in a society, we have people who have those values at different places on their hierarchy of values, right? To some, justice is much more important than mercy, and to some, mercy is much more important than justice. In fact, we represent these values, at least in theory, in the district attorney who prosecutes criminals and the public defender, which is provided by a society as an act of mercy to ensure that justice is done. There is also, of course, the institutionalized act of mercy in the presidential pardon, which is, in theory, a way to course correct an injustice, or, on the other hand, to allow society to find its way when they realize that they've made a large-scale mistake, such as prohibition in the 1920s, or the ridiculous cannabis restriction laws that we've had for the last century. However, that is not by itself what I want to talk about. I use the hierarchy of values as a way to frame the importance of the topic that I'm discussing, because I think that is what I would call a root value. Right? So let's say hypothetically in this hierarchy of values that I'm talking about, you put justice and mercy and freedom and honor. There's a million things you could theoretically put on it, but I'm going to put one at the root value, and that is truth. Now, a libertarian cartoon would say that if you did that, then of course you're saying that truth is always more important than mercy or justice, and if you applied truth at the expense of either, then you are denying both. I'm not in the mood to discuss philosophy in general in this series, and I'm certainly not in the mood to discuss it with people who have cartoonish binary thinking and take things to extreme impractical values. In fact, as I've said multiple times, this series is about practical, scalable ideas, right? So, if I compare it to other things I've talked about, right, such as orphan courts or legitimacy in terms of how you engage people, or certification of people to make sure that they're not psychopaths, these are very practical ideas, right? So the truth is not what you would inherently think of as a practical, scalable idea, but at the same time, it is, and I'll tell you why. So, as an ideal, the truth has value unto itself. Very few of us like to be lied to. Very few of us who are civilized members of society like to lie unto itself. There are, of course, party games such as Balderdash, where you make up the definition of words, where it can be fun to lie in a safe social moral situation. But by and large, our society requires truth to function. If you go to the grocery store and you care about what you eat, and you look at the labels on the food that you eat, you count on the integrity of those labels to make the choices that you have in a day-to-day life. You want to know how many calories it has. You want to know what ingredients are in it. You want to know how much fat it has. And those laws have taken a long time in our society to be able to be generated, right? And so, and there are consequences for them. And as I discussed in the last episode of the podcast, if those laws aren't enforced, there are real consequences and real problems. And the mechanisms in our society for the enforcement of laws are imperfect at best. So there is a really specific example of the importance of truth in our day-to-day lives. But the truth is, if you pick literally any institution, and I mean any institution, whether it is a church or a market or a company or the government itself, all of them. And I want to repeat this. There is no legitimate daylight institution in our culture, in our society, that does not depend on truth to survive. In fact, even illegitimate institutions such as the mafia or organized crime rely on honor among thieves, in the sense that if in an organization of criminals they start lying to each other, that organization will soon cease to exist. Any organization, any hierarchy, depends on the integrity of information conveyed from one person to another in that organization to function. If you're, just imagine in your day-to-day business, right? I don't care what your job is, whether you're a teacher or a programmer or an artist. If you're a teacher and you are given a history book that is full of gibberish, and you try and teach that to your kids, you're going to have some angry parents. If you have, no, unfortunately, you'll have some angry parents who try and teach the truth, but we're not going to dive into that in this podcast. Or if you are a programmer and somebody hands you code that is full of bugs and they say, hey, it's totally fine, it's been tested and vetted and everything's fine, and then you put that into production, it's going to explode. And sometimes there are life and death consequences for the things that a programmer codes. If you do anything, heck, even if you're an artist, right? If you are trying to paint your masterpiece and the outside of your paint says yellow, but the inside is green, you're going to have to spend however long it takes when you put the wrong color on what you're trying to paint. There is literally no occupation, no activity that does not rely on truth. So when I talk about practical, scalable ideas, there is no more practical, scalable idea than the truth. But we seem to have kind of forgotten that in our day-to-day civil society, in particular with regards to the media and regards to our government. So let me go back to the episode in this series where I talked about sea lions and heathers and legitimacy. Legitimacy is a method by which you can reduce or increase the social power of a discussion about whether or not you even are willing to engage in that discussion. And that has a direct ramification in the truth. If we have a discussion in government where one side has their truth and the other side has their truth, then that's humanity, right? I mean, I'm not going to claim that everyone has a different moral truth, because they do. Or rather, I'm not going to pretend that they don't. But there are levels and layers to this where if we can agree to disagree on whether or not your specific personal subjective truth is superior to somebody else's personal subjective truth. But if we can't agree that the cat is black or white, or we can't even agree that what happened, or more importantly, given the current events in Washington right now, we can't even agree as to whether or not we want to see the evidence or are willing to admit that we want to see the evidence. These are real problems. And to be honest, the events in Washington right now are going to justify my discussion about the importance of more radical change that we need to have. But I've made this series first because not everyone is comfortable with radical change. So I am talking about what makes even the most ardent conservative in their heart of hearts happy, which is fundamental tradition. And with regards to our government, both state and federal and local, you cannot function if truth is not important. You cannot, let me repeat that, you cannot function in government if truth is not important. And I want to reiterate, by the way, that there is nothing required in terms of new laws to make lying for profit illegal. It is called fraud. And it is as easy to enforce as the law enforcement officials or district attorneys that are willing to enforce it. But the fact of the matter is that it requires a populace that demands that they do. So if I'm talking about a practical, scalable idea, then you, citizen who is hearing this podcast, need to demand the truth from your leaders and your district attorneys. And when people lie, you need to demand that they are prosecuted for fraud. When you engage with individuals who talk about lies and accept lies, you need to cease to engage with those individuals. When you pass along a lie, you are, in fact, propagating the social termitization of our entire civilization. Fake news isn't just some abstract concept that makes elections harder. It is the literal acid that will cause the collapse of civilization. Let me repeat that also. Fake news is not an abstract problem that makes newscasters sad. It will result in the destruction of our society, of our civilization. I gave up being a prophet when I left the Mormon Church, but hear me now. If we do not embrace truth in our civilization, if we do not stamp out fake news and fake news organizations and the purveyors of fake news and the proprietors of fake news and everything fake about the fake politicians and the fake people who say the fake things, then we will have a much bigger problem than civil war or the collapse of our society. We will be looking at the total destruction of our species. Right now, there is a remarkable young woman called Greta Thunberg who is traveling the world acting as a virtual apostle of the future generations who will have to clean up the mess that we have left behind. And when they look back in hindsight about what the root cause of this was, it is not greed. It is lies. It is climate denial and every other kind of denial that we tolerate and that we allow to proceed in our society and everything and every institution that we have. There are lies in business. There are lies in government. There are lies in art. There are lies in news. And you know what? we are human beings, so none of us are perfect, and we will all occasionally lie. I have not lied to you in this podcast, but yes, I have occasionally told lies, and I regret most of them. But I will tell you this. I have never lied in my professional capacity. When I have a job, and I consider this a job, I don't lie because I have professional integrity. When I have a discussion as a political activist, I do not lie because I have personal integrity. When I have anything I do that matters, integrity is the ultimate practical, scalable idea. And the fact of the matter is that the more you honor or engage or promote people that have no personal integrity but might make you feel good or might give you the chance to advance yourself, the more you are destroying us all. So in addition to fixing your own house and having some personal introspection and personal integrity, in addition to that, you can stop having anything to do with or promoting or empowering in any way people who lie. And I'm sure that your first reaction, anyone who hears this, being a human being, is that you don't do that you don't lie to people. And more importantly, you certainly don't have much to do with liars. Let me tell you, citizen, you do. Because you are a human being. I know of at least 2 people in my life who are, quite frankly, purveyors of lies. But I tolerate them for personal reasons. But I have, over time, drastically reduced that number. And I don't think I can get it lower than that. But I will tell you, citizen, that you need to personally reduce the lies in our society in every way you can, both in personal association and tolerance of people spreading fake news and lies over social media, or even your potential participation in the social media that allows the lies to participate itself. Facebook is a problem. Twitter is a problem. And I get that you know people on these mediums, and if you make the personal choice to stay on them, that is your personal choice. But understand that even the marketplace itself, where you have the discussion, is a way of legitimizing or not legitimizing the truth. Even being in a Facebook group that passes large amounts of lies is legitimizing fake news. You might not quit Facebook, but if you're in a group that discusses fake news and provides fake news and lies and is riddled with climate deniers or anti-vaxxers or other philosophies or political motivations that lie on a regular basis, you are empowering lies. And just like at the end of the movie An Inconvenient Truth, it provides several specific things like turning off light switches or recycling or small things that you can do as an individual. There are a million little things, too many things for me to even cover in this episode of the podcast, to have you reduce lies in our society. But more than anything else I will ever say, let me repeat that, more than anything else I will ever say, and more important than anything else you will ever hear, lies will lead to our destruction. I could make the argument that love one another outside of any religious context is ultimately the path to a utopian society, and I agree with that. But I will tell you also, citizen, that the fact is that even in a utopian society where everyone loved each other, If there were lies, that would be no utopian society. Love without truth is not really love. If someone tells you they love you, but they're lying, that isn't love. The fact of the matter is, citizen, that truth is the root value in the hierarchy of values. It doesn't matter what you consider to be most important in our society, whether it is truth or economic justice or mercy or freedom, anything that you honor or that you love or that you care about requires truth to have meaning. Truth is the lifeblood of any life of integrity, of any value of integrity. Without introspection, you cannot have any degree of truth. Without the application of truth in everything we do becomes meaningless. Think about that.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, available in many markets, including at Amazon.com. Copyright
2019.
Red Anvil Amalgamated, LLC.
To fight the forces of evil!